Good morning, everyone. I'm Saeed Khan, and welcome back to another episode of The Week That Was, Friday, February the 4th. We are joined with a terrific panel today, so let's go through the roster. We are joined with Attorney Joel Sklar. Joel, how you doing?
I'm doing great this morning, thanks.
Excellent. We also have the Director of Focus Hope, Portia Roberson.
Okay.
And we have Automotive Journalist and Editor of the Detroit Bureau, Paul Eisenstein.
Good to be with you.
Joining us as usual, we have intrepid reporter Nancy Derringer from Deadline Detroit.
Intrepid. Give me a break. That means well-traveled. And, right now I feel like the only thing I've seen in the last month has been the inside of my goddamn house. So there you go.
And Trader Joe's.
Yeah, right.
Intrepid is better than insipid.
I didn't realize one adjective was going to be a topic point for today.
Sorry.
We can go with that. Well, that's because of our illustrious editor and maestro Allan Lengel last week actually turned a word of profanity into a verb. So all bets are on here with the Oxford English Dictionary getting expanded.
Let's see what we can do.
But speaking of those wonderfully civil people, we have to our neighbors, either to the north or the south here in Detroit, taking your persuasion, we have the truckers' convoy protest, which has been underway in Ottawa, so much so that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau apparently had to be taken to a secret and secure location to get away from the possibility of things getting out of hand. What's going on in Canada, and what is up with the kind of protest which is eerily similar to what we've seen here in the United States?
And eerily funded, they're saying, by some right-wing groups from the United States. So no wonder there's a similarity.
Well, there's a point there, Paul, because within that motley assortment of 18-wheelers that I saw in Ottawa were Confederate flags. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't recall one of the capitals of the Confederacy being Winnipeg or Edmonton.
No, I mean, if this was down in Brazil, maybe you'd understand that. A lot of the Confederacy fled to Brazil after they were defeated. But no, I don't think even in the western provinces, which tend to get a little conservative, do they fly the Confederate flag very often.
Yeah, Portia, what do you think, though, about this fact that you're seeing this imagery happening in Canada where the Confederate flag is now seen as a sign of protest, or in the minds of these truckers, a sign of liberation and freedom?
Yeah, I don't know how they have adopted this as their sign of liberation and freedom, since the whole history of this flag has been everything but liberation and freedom. Sure. I guess I could simply say racism is alive and well everywhere. And Canada's not really, even though it's always held itself out as sort of a bastion of good vibes in some respects, it's not. And it doesn't really surprise me, because whenever, we've seen enough backlash to know that the backlash will happen everywhere. And so I just see it as part of that, like nothing different.
All right, Joel, have you been keeping up with it? And do you expect that there's going to be any violence happening there?
Every time I've been in the show, I've been pessimistic. So I'm going to continue that vibe and that trend. I think ultimately there will be. I mean, my whole fear in the last 2 years has been that ultimately we're going to, Canada's going through this too, have some sort of civil war, have some sort of violence. I think we're heading toward that because we're more divisive than ever. The Canadians are the most polite people in the world, so I believed. And so when they start getting pissed off, there's a problem. But yeah, I think that, polarity is increasing. It increases more tension. I think violence is in the offing. People are taking, the truckers are using their power, which is remarkably strong. If that doesn't get them their way, what is the next alternative? And violence, I think, is where humankind goes. So yeah, I'm real pessimistic. I think the tensions will increase, and I think ultimately we're going to have, some sort of violence. It's awful.
That's fascinating. I was having a Facebook conversation with somebody from my former hometown who's a retired police officer. And he seemed to be understanding, even deferential to these protesters, saying, look, I mean, they've finally gone too far, the government with them. They've crossed a line. there's a tipping point and a breaking point by which the public just can't take anymore, and so almost justifying this action. Nancy, I mean, is that really what's happening now? Even some aspects of law enforcement are justifying it.
We have not talked about what allegedly is the impetus for this whole protest, which is supposedly mask mandates. And anytime you check in on any social media comment thread about this, or any comment thread about this particular protest, and say, oh, so the Canadians are anti-vax too, and somebody will pop in and go, no, this is about anti-mask or this is about anti-vaccine mandates. We're all for choice, my body, my choice, blah, blah, blah. And it's not, but it's not. Then just Google up, Canadian trucker protests and just start paging through the photographs from a wide variety of media sources. And what you'll see is no mask, no vaccine. There's some upside down Canadian flags. I don't even know if flying a flag upside down as a sign of distress is even a thing in Canada. It certainly is here. There are flags that have swastikas painted on them. So, so basically this is a protest that may have started with the noble intention of opposing or vaccine mandates, but has morphed into the full right-wing cornucopia of crazy. It's, we don't like, it's not that we don't like mandates. We don't like vaccines, period. We don't like masks. We don't like this. We don't like that. Wah, wah, the usual. Just the same crap that we've been hearing in this country. And so the fact that it's across the border is not really that surprising. As far as the violence goes, Joel, don't they have a lot fewer guns in Canada than we have? I know they've got a lot of hunting weapons because
they are banned from owning pistols in almost any condition, even if you want to be target shooting, even if you're an Olympic athlete in some of the gun shooting categories. It's very, very limited. Rifles, different matter, but pistols, very, very limited.
So unless they're going to hit each other with hockey sticks, I feel a little bit better about the potential for violence in Canada than maybe Joel does.
I'm super pessimistic. Go ahead.
Let me add one more thing, to put this in perspective. And this is something my wife, who, by the way, is Canadian, now emigre and now naturalized American citizen, brings an interesting perspective whenever we talk politics. And one of the things that she is deeply concerned about is we in the media tend to pick up on anything that the right wing, the Trump extremists do, and we make it a headline story and we blow it out of proportion. Her argument is give it no coverage and they'll fade away. Well, I just was looking, I broke from this group for a second and was looking at some numbers. There's somewhere between 5 and 8, maybe 10,000 people up in Ottawa protesting. They had bragged that they'd have 50,000. So even they couldn't bring it, even backed by American right-wing money. So yeah, they're out there, and yes, it doesn't take many trucks to tie things up. Give me 100 well placed across Ottawa, and I could bring the city to its knees if I wanted to in terms of movement. But it is a small group, and we have to remember that. We've seen Nazis; they get the lead story on everything from Fox to CNN across the spectrum, and yet they may have 50 people who run at the first sign that they're outnumbered. We have to start covering the reality of these things and point out they're not showing up in numbers. They are primarily there to get headlines and to get coverage that doesn't put in perspective their limited numbers.
So Alan, I was going to say, who gives a shit about Canada? That's my feeling. I mean, it's a suburb of the United States.
America Junior is what Homer Simpson.
Oh, Alan, if my wife was here, she would be violent at that.
Right. We need them to get a little.
Before we move on from this topic, though, I want to illuminate one little detail that I found in a BBC story. I figured BBC, they're straight shooters. They have no dog in this fight. I can read their story and be okay. And they were talking about how some food bank had to call the police because the truckers were there demanding sandwiches from the food bank because the restaurants wouldn't serve them because they refused to follow the mask rules. And so that's just like
no sandwiches, no peas.
no poutine for protesters. Well, I mean, this idea of numbers, though, here's another statistic. 1 out of every 5 Canadian trucker is actually of Asian Indian heritage. And I don't think there were even 20 of them in the protest videos that we were seeing. It seems as though the protest is very racially homogenous. Do you think that has something to do with the politics, the ideology behind it? It doesn't seem as though it's the most representative protest, given what is the pretext for it.
Well, I think ideology, it's certainly what drives it. A philosophy of white supremacy, I think, is probably driving this. Which takes a relatively small group of people to have a huge effect. And Paul is right. I think that there is a myth, we mythalize, or there's a certain illusion with these white supremacist groups being perhaps more prevalent or stronger than they are. But for me, they scare the hell out of me. And I think it takes a very few number of very committed people to cause great atrocity. And so that's my concern, is that I just think we're ramping up. I just see us getting, again, it's like a rubber band, we're just going to snap. And that's kind of the feeling that I have, both in Canada and certainly here, where it's so, we're so virulent and everybody's so strongly positioned and so unwilling to listen. I don't know what the end is going to be.
I think Black and brown people know that protests never end well when we participate for us. So they were smart enough to say, like, this is not the hill I literally might want to die on. So Correct. They just stayed away. Like, we know how those protests that we get involved in typically end for us. So yeah.
Saeed, I remember reading that too, and I was fascinated by that. When we were in Europe last year, we sat next to a table of some Britons, and they were talking about how in the UK, remember, they had this crisis with a shortage of truckers and so forth last fall. In the UK, the vast majority of long haul and short haul truckers are from Eastern Europe. And so when Brexit happened, a lot of them had to leave, which caused this crisis of moving goods because suddenly there weren't enough truck drivers to do it. So it's interesting how different ethnicities kind of co-opt these various economic niches.
But the tool of commerce, using that to, is pretty cool and pretty simple. When you have truckers who aren't delivering or clogging up traffic, that's a really effective tool.
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a truck stop outside the Bonneville Salt Flats on I-80 in Utah. If anyone is out there for whatever reason, it's run by a Sikh family, and you can get an Indian breakfast there, which rivals anything in Jackson Heights, New York. So
really,
yes, it is fantastic, especially if you take it to go and are on the Salt Flats at sunrise. There's nothing else like it. America.
All right.
But the point you're making, Joel, about it seems as though the white supremacist movement is global. And it's interesting how they're latching on to Canada, because apparently Sugar Daddy Putin wasn't putting out the red carpet for them to come to Russia, or maybe it's just too far. So something to keep in mind. Also, Nancy, just to let you know about flying the Canadian flag upside down. If you do, it means you're out of maple syrup. So yeah, keep that in mind.
Or Tim Hortons donuts.
Or Timmy's, yes.
Right.
We're lucky. I know people who fiend for Tim Hortons who live in Chicago because they don't have it. So
wow.
We're very lucky. So speaking of people who put foot in mouth, we have here in Michigan, gearing up for the election season, a couple of Republican candidates who seem to be using rhetoric which perhaps would find a home in the Ottawa protests as well. And we have a brief video clip of that. Michael.
If you see something you don't like happening with the machines, if you see something going on, unplug it from the wall. The Second Amendment isn't there for hunting rights. It's not there for self-defense. The Second Amendment is there. The founders put it there to protect all the others. And it says to the government, the people have the right stop what's going on. If they go back, we look at our Declaration of Independence. We have our Congress. The ideal thing is to do this peacefully. That's ideal. But the American people, at some point in time, if we can't change the tide, which I believe we can, need to be prepared for lock and load. So you asked, what can we do? Show of arm.
So that was a clip of two different candidates. The first one regarding unplugging voting machines in case they're not working out was from gubernatorial candidate Ryan Kelley, who, by the way, is not the only person of that persuasion. We have Tudor Dixon also running for governor here in Michigan, who in fact got an audience with Donald Trump down at Mar-a-Lago. And then the other clip regarding the Second Amendment was from state Senate candidate Mike Lock and Loaded Detmer. Is this simply what we're going to have to anticipate moving forward toward November?
As a poll worker myself, and I anticipate being a poll worker again in November, if anybody tries to unplug my tabulator, they're going to have to go through me to do it. And I may look old and decrepit, but I promise you that I do boxing 3 days a week, and I will not allow that to happen. So,
a martial arts expert never divulges her secret.
Well, my right cross isn't that great.
Or as my Yemenite sister-in-law would say, I hang them.
No, the real question is, are we going to have to start having police stationed at every poll around the country, certainly in anything that resembles a blue district? Yeah, that's the thing that worries me, is that you're going to see heavy attempts at intimidation outside key polling districts. And we know that there are some cops who will absolutely do the right thing. Unfortunately, there's more and more information that the far-right extremists have also infiltrated the police, and that's something that concerns me.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting when you use the word extremists. There is no such thing in the Republican Party anymore. These people are mainstream. These are mainstream thoughts now. The lock and load, something that as Jews we don't hear a lot about, but lock. I mean, this whole craziness with guns and unplugging voting machines. That's the Trump way. And really, it's interesting. All the candidates who are going down, Republican candidates who are going down to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Trump. They are not getting endorsements unless they say, yes, the election was stolen. Right. And that's why we're seeing James Craig, who went down there, who has not gotten an endorsement, because I don't think he'll go that far. So.
A couple of things. First of all, the Republicans aren't the only ones who own guns. There are some people, Democrats, who like 9mm and like ARs and are willing to use that in reverse if they have to. So it's not a one-sided military buildup that's occurring. I know several people who are fed up and have armed and have trained. And so if it does go to violence, in fact, it will be a two-way street, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but it's also not meaning that it will be a clean sweep. Candidates like those simply thinking that they can take over by pulling out their weapons.
Yeah, but the anti-democratic sentiment of pulling the plug out of tabulating machines.
There's no question.
The iron, it's like it's absurd to me, and that's where we're heading. We're this experiment of democracy is failing. Our trajectory is downward.
Let me throw one more thing in real quickly, because I think we all need to weigh in. This goes back to my point before about numbers. We keep talking about these people as if they are half or more of the population. I disagree. And I think what we're starting to see more and more of, I know more and more Republicans, and they still build themselves as Republicans, who would not dream of voting for these candidates, who would not dream of going to these protests, who are fed up with this. And the real challenge for the Democrats right now will be to let these people create such an overwhelming disgust among independents Remember, the party of Lincoln is no longer a majority party or close to it. What do they say? 35% of Americans consider themselves Republicans anymore, at least the party of Trump. And this is going to be the critical thing. Can the Democrats, the disorganized party, start uniting enough that in the lead up to the election, they can let the Republicans of Trump paint themselves in a corner where good people who are fed up with this level of intimidation, of violence and threat can't vote for them anymore.
Yeah,
but I think it's a combination. I think you have to have Democrats who I agree, Paul, that they have to be organized, and we have to make sure that, we let that offshoot and that the Republicans, if that's the face of their party. But I also think Republicans have a certain responsibility, because I do think that there are Republicans who disagree with all of this, but they have got to be loud and vocal. And at some point, they're going to have to risk, not getting the Trump endorsement, being challenged in their primaries. I mean, there's a moment when you have to ask yourself how, and not just necessarily step back from running anymore, because what we see instead is the sort of level-headed Republicans are saying, like, I'm out. I don't want to have anything to do with this. And I get that. I totally understand it. But I think the only way it's going to shift is if some of those Republicans say, no, I'm sticking in this and I'm going to fight back against what the party has done. And then the only other concern I have is that even though it's such a small part of the party, and I think you're right that it's been elevated to sound like it's so many folks, and it's not. The scary part is even that small group is having such an influence and sort of, we saw can do real damage, right? Like, we saw what they did at the Capitol. So we know that, like, despite the fact that they're small in numbers, they can really do harm, not just to the country, but to other individuals. And that truly does scare me.
But what about this point? What about this point about the few Republicans that are speaking out, and look at the pressures that they're getting from their own establishment? I mean, the news today is that the Republican National Committee is going to be censuring Adam Kinzinger from Illinois and Liz Cheney from Wyoming. Not exactly everybody's paragon of Lincolnian republicanism.
No.
But the fact is that even they who dare to speak out are getting pretty severely rebuked from the establishment, and particularly leadership like Kevin McCarthy on the House side and perhaps McConnell on the Senate.
Sure. I mean, I think, again, there's a psychological, emotional component to those who identify with Trump and that movement. And again, it may be 15%, 10%, 20%. I don't know what the numbers are. But that emotional component is so significant. It is their identity. It's who they define themselves out. They're the victims of grievances. I just think what we're talking about, guns, Republicans have them, the trajectory, it's disturbing to me to see that this is where we are. That we're arming up, that the division is huge, and that emotional component, you can argue it, you can reason, you would think, but you're not going to reason with emotion. And I think that there's a lost group of people, a significant number, who are zealots and who believe and who will do who think they've been robbed and will continue to think they've been robbed, the more disenfranchised they become. And that's when I think the time for violence is right.
We have to point out at this point, I just want to add, Joel, it was introduced as an attorney, but he's also a clinical psychologist, so he knows what he's talking about.
I have no idea, but that's my view, and that's how I see what's going on, and that it's embedded and it's deep and it's driven, and those are hard things to separate from your being. You can't, and
it's very hard. It's hard to admit you were wrong about where the Triscuits were in the pantry when you're arguing with your spouse over it. Imagine how hard it is to say, I was taken in by a clownish con man. I mean, that's almost impossible.
I agree. That's the fraud.
Well, you know what? It's interesting if you take any other president and see the whole conspiracy to undermine the election, and you put in, if Nixon had done that, if any of the Bushes had done that, if Bill Clinton had done that, there'd be such outrage. But we've basically given Trump a total free pass because we have no expectations of him being an honest human being. Right. We have no expectations of being presidential. And so he gets away and we go, if it were Nixon, oh my God, come on. Nixon got pushed out for a break-in, covering over a break-in. Trump has gotten away with.
And Don't
You could argue.
discount.
I
Don't
mean,
discount the fact that we have also thrown not just Trump and he's not presidential. We've thrown out norms all over the American political landscape, which I think is exemplified this week by Rudy Giuliani, who apparently is participating in this ridiculous singing show on Fox called The Masked Singer. And I mean, do you remember when Bill Clinton put on Ray-Bans and played a saxophone for Arsenio Hall and people shit their pants over that? I mean, oh my God, it's so unpresidential, And then we have
Obama wearing a tan suit. Remember, they lost their minds about him wearing a tan suit, and now it's like that seems like comedy. I know. We thought that was a bad idea, right?
Here was the good news. First of all, it was on Fox. What a surprise! But the other thing is, 2 of the judges walked out.
Well, but they came back. So
yeah, but I think we are starting to see more and more pushback. It's going to be very interesting to me as the Insurrection Committee, the 1-6 committee, starts pulling the string together and then starts to go to television. It's not the same as Watergate, where the television could dominate every aspect of our viewing opportunities. But I think we are going to start seeing some things. I've heard it criticized the committee for not televising yet. And maybe it's good that they don't until they have so much to talk about that it becomes so overwhelming in what they present. You may have heard today, the news came out, the Washington Post has a piece where they've been able to trace back the insurrection, the whole organization, to a meeting at, what a surprise, Trump Tower on the 4th of January. And among the people involved, what a surprise, Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny. We are starting to have some real, if this were any crime show, we would start seeing the strings in bright orange start to connect the people together. And what's interesting is, while we don't have the 18-minute gap, there are enough videos and enough transcripts and stuff coming out. We're hearing what these people said. Yeah. What happens when all of this starts coming out? Again, I get back to, it's not going to be the angry people worried about us Jews drinking adrenochrome. It's going to be about the center of America. And if the center of America holds, it won't matter what the right does. This will self-correct. If the center doesn't hold, democracy could fail.
Right. And mere anarchy loosed upon the earth, according to Yeats. Yes. Allan, you made a good point regarding Nixon. I mean, I don't know if anybody in 1974 in the Republican Party looked at their poster of Tricky Dick on the wall and said, I want to grow up to be just like him. But you've got an awful lot of Trump wannabes in the form of Ron DeSantis, Josh Hawley, and others who are certainly, if not borrowing from the playbook, at least borrowing from the script. It does seem as though something is different now than it was 48 years ago. Can the Republican Party, I know that Paul's saying that the center could hold in the country, but can the Republican Party come back from this?
I think the Republican Party is going to have to just melt down and rebuild from the ashes. I think the party is so far gone right now, and it's Cheney and people like that who are trying to hold on, and Mitt Romney to some degree. He's sort of back and forth. I mean, sometimes he's got like total backbone and sometimes none, but at least he's got some at some point. And it's even, Susan Collins, who again intermittently has a backbone. They need to rebuild. Yeah,
I'm with Nancy on Susan Collins.
Yes,
it
seems as though you didn't.
Whose image are they going to rebuild? They can rebuild Trump's image, and whose image will Republicans rebuild?
His lesson.
They need to find some integrity, which they've totally lost. The party is just
I mean, it's a very, again, it's the question then, and who's going to lead that new party? Who's going to be brave? Who's going to have courage? Who's going to have a spine?
Right.
So far, I see nobody who's going to lead that, to take that mantle.
Well,
but Nancy has a good point. Is right. If they lose the elections, that's the only thing that's going to force them to re-examine, because that's all the party's about right now. It's not about policy; it's about winning. And if they keep losing, they're going to have to say, "Wait a minute, maybe we need a different image."
And if they keep
winning,
don't
think it happens because the midterms just never, like, it always flips, right? So everybody's predicting that the Republicans will take over the House. They'll probably take over the Senate. So the timing is bad, but I think Nancy's absolutely right. The only way it happens, the only way people get courageous and course correct from this disaster is if they start to lose. And I just don't know that happens, not in the near future.
Yeah, I agree with Portia. You have a party that has done very well with disinformation. Certainly, harnessing the strength of those who feel that they've been disenfranchised and have grievances, and that's just going to continue. And this big lie keeps going and going and going, and you've prepared people to accept falsehood. There's a large segment of the population that's willing to adopt whatever they need to adopt to justify their own ideology, and that's a dangerous place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is happening on the federal level or the national level. It's happening on the state level, and so we have, of course, our own alumna from the Trump cabinet. Former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos,
best and the brightest,
who is now spearheading the Michigan school choice ballot drive for the upcoming election. Where do we see this one going? Collective exhale, okay.
Collective side.
That's I was just going to say, I just feel the big sigh because I have a feeling it's probably going to pass. I mean, it's going to
from the big lie to the big sigh.
To the big sigh. I think we're going to. I mean, she has made it clear from the beginning that her aim is to destroy public education in Michigan. A lot of it is cloaked in this, we just want what's best for the children, but she doesn't. And she's going to do her level best, and her money is going to do the rest. And they're going to decimate public school funding.
There's one possible thing that could help. We have so far not heard a lot about Betsy and the insurrection, but she wasn't just sitting there waving a flag. She was funding a lot of it, and at some point she's going to get dragged into it. And as soon as she does, this proposal, I should say, is going to be tarred with her sweat, as she has to suddenly explain her way out of helping fund an insurrection. And this is the interesting thing to me about everything coming up before this election. And we've seen this over the years. There's a lot of stuff that is just on the periphery waiting to come out. It's going to be very interesting because I think the 1-6 committee is going to have an awful lot that's going to start dropping in the next few months. And almost anything related to the Republicans, all the key liars, all the key leaders who are willing to trade democracy for winning are connected to the insurrection. If you add to that any significant additional violence in the months to come, there is a chance of a huge backlash. I say chance, but I think that there is a chance of a huge backlash. And this, again, is where the Republicans, at least what is today's Republican Party, is at risk of losing the center.
I think they've lost the center already. Yeah, I don't think the center exists anymore. I guess my only fear is that people are exhausted. So I just don't know that they look at what will come out in the next few months in a way in which there's not the sort of audience there was for Watergate, right? It's not like we all sit down and we watch the news and, we get up to date on what's happening in our world. And I think add to that this 2-year global pandemic that we've been living in. And I don't know if the center of the Republican Party or even your average everyday American who just wants to live their life and who wants to have, peace and good times and be able to work their job really cares anymore. I mean, because it's so much to care about right now.
Right.
Like, you've got, are my kids ever going back in a school building? Am I going to have a job? Am I going to be part of the Great Resignation? Is our cost for food and everything else going to continue to rise? And then add to that, I think, sort of the groundswell of interest that has to go with really digging deep into January 6th and really caring and showing up at the ballot box to show people that we care about that. I just don't know that people have the appetite for it right now.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Portia. I think people are exhausted, and whether or not they'll have the attention span to give what January 6th deserves is a real fair question.
All right, here's one thing. I think Nancy and Allan were at least maybe in high school working on a school paper at the time, but I think we all were at least somewhat in the journalism field when Watergate went down. And if so, we all remember that the American public had very little interest until they had interest. It came down to a fairly late period in the Watergate investigation before suddenly the country got polarized. And that's one of the reasons that you saw Goldwater and others switch and finally cross the lawn and say to the president, get the hell out of here.
Is that possible?
Well, if you remember, if you remember, McGovern won by a landslide while Watergate was going on.
Joel is right. I mean, because I'm a voracious news consumer, I have probably seen 2 or 3 or 4 excellently put together, crafted, and edited documentaries on January 6th. And there is something about watching that footage of those people screaming and, pounding at cops with, fire extinguishers and smashing their way through windows and walking around and shitting in the halls or whatever the hell they're doing. And it's jaw dropping. I mean, every time I watch it, I think I can't be more appalled and shocked, and yet I am. But like Joel just said, it's, we live in these media bubbles. You're never going to see that on Tucker Carlson or, Sean Hannity, or even in Fox regular news, which they claim is fair and balanced. I mean, what was the story that kept popping around Twitter last week? There was some Washington State trooper who refused to get vaccinated. They had a vaccine mandate if you were a trooper. He refused to get it. They said, okay, you're going to lose your job. He said, I give up my job. His last radio transmission, cops just love this shit. Was like, Jay Inslee kissed my ass. Yeah, he was all over Fox News. Look at this brave patriot. He's telling the governor to kiss his ass. He's giving up his job. Well, guess what? He croaked last week from COVID. Not one word about it on Fox. Not one word.
They're all vaccinated.
Nancy,
they don't care.
I know they're all vaccinated, but my point is the journalism 101 is you follow up on your stories, and they haven't done any of this stuff.
I was going to say, Nancy, I think you mistake some of these what you call rioters. I think of them as spirited tourists.
Yeah.
You wonder though if Watergate had the same social media we have now, Fox News, if Nixon would have survived. For such what would be now, what an insignificant event. I mean, he didn't cause an insurrection.
But you
wonder with all the variables that are out there, whether or not it would have any impact. And that we may be beyond being offended. I mean, that's terrifying. That
numbers, guys, numbers. We keep talking about Fox, even their most watched shows. Their share of the American public who watch this big. Fox is another thing that we give too much power to. It gives power to those who were already ready to believe that stuff. It just makes them dig in more.
It mobilizes them, and that's the danger of it.
But it is still not talking to the mainstream.
Right.
We
I agree with you.
Fox's power.
It just takes such a small number of people to cause such hell and chaos that that the people that they're championing.
And it may be the Democrats in the Democrats' interest. If the Democrats can figure out how to use the statements and the video in the election campaign. You have an awful lot of Republicans who try to position themselves as sort of middle of the road, who have gone out there and said these were patriots at the Capitol, this was Antifa and all that. Those are great sound bites for opposition ads. We're going to see an awful lot of that.
A lot of people believe it.
Everybody that these folks supported the Capitol riot.
Anything works with pomp and circumstance as the background music. You know, Nancy, you mentioned Bill Clinton and you mentioned Rudy Giuliani. You forgot Richard Nixon with "Sock It to Me."
Yeah,
and his effort to do that. Well, speaking about the networks and speaking about the major cable news outlets, we've got breaking news out of CNN with Jeff Zucker having to step down for failure to disclose a relationship that he had with another CNN executive, not Wolf Blitzer. Okay, now try to get that image out of your head.
Thank you.
I mean, Zucker is getting quite a bit of interesting press, including this focus on how he was responsible for essentially enabling Donald Trump when he was at NBC with The Apprentice. And then, of course, also his involvement with the Cuomo scandal, both of them, former Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York, and then former CNN personality Chris Cuomo, the younger brother, with that whole Home Alone interviews during COVID sense. What's going to be the epitaph on Mr. Zucker?
Well, you're going to have to drive a stake through his heart. I mean, he's clearly a survivor, and I'm sure he'll be back in some form somewhere. However, and I don't really care about about CNN. I've mentioned on the show before, I cut the cable a long time ago. I don't watch cable news. I don't care what CNN does. I started to read in New York Magazine this morning a long explication of why they believe that this is actually about a feud between the Cuomos and Zucker, and that this is if Chris Cuomo had to fall on his sword, then they were going to make sure that Zucker fell on his, because apparently this relationship he had with this woman was an open secret. I mean, this is, everybody knew about it at CNN. They barely tried to keep it hidden. I get the feeling that they just kind of like bounced him on a technicality on this stuff. But I will always, 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 till the end of my days, hold him in the top 5 who are responsible for Donald Trump. The other 4, of course, being Rupert Murdoch, Roger Ailes, Mark Burnett, and Vladimir Putin. And for that, I think that he needs to go to the guillotine. So we're gonna put him in the first.
I think, look, if people like Brian Williams made a comeback, I mean, Jeff Zucker,
Yeah,
this is not a fatal blow.
No.
This is a detour for a guy who's had such an incredibly successful
Sounds
career.
cosmetic.
Well, and the woman
else,
who he had the affair with is taking his job, right? So, I mean,
there you go.
She may bring him back as her deputy next.
She used to work for Cuomo.
Right,
she was
she did.
Cuomo's media guy or whatever.
Media girl. Yeah, whatever.
Media girl. They lived in the same building, so they've been having this affair for years. I don't know why they're acting as if that this was just something that they discovered, or that they kind of made the argument that it developed over COVID. But rumor on the street is that they lived in the same apartment building, so it'd be easier for them to have their tryst when their partners were not at home.
Well, they were. I mean, so, I think that they're both single now, right? I think they've.
Yeah, they're both divorced. They're both divorced.
So we can't call it tryst anymore. It's just plain old boring date.
Hooking up.
Great word.
I will say that Jeff Zucker, every time I see a picture of him, I'm like, I've never seen a man who looks more like a human toe than him. So, there you go. He's just got one of those unfortunate, kind of like this
towheads.
Yeah, he's a towhead. Anyway.
So Nancy, you mentioned the guillotine. I mean, was this a Proustian moment from your last trip to France?
No, I've been making my little list. I'm like Arya in Game of Thrones. Every night I go with Jerry Hall, Mark Zucker or Mark Zuckerberg. So
yeah, I mean, you gotta love Mick Jagger must just be like, yeah, I'm done with that. You can have that. So
Ivanka.
So speaking about suspensions and possibly stepping down from jobs, we have Making Whoopi sit on the bench. Whoopi Goldberg has been suspended from The View, an ABC morning talk show. for comments that she made regarding the Holocaust and race, claiming that, in fact, the Holocaust was not about race. And now there is, of course, quite a bit of chatter on the news as to what is Whoopi's fate. And what are some of the issues regarding race and the discussion of it, and of course the discussion of the Holocaust as well.
I have a strong take on this, but I'm going to defer because I believe we have 3 people of the Jewish persuasion on today's panel. I think
not
they
one,
get to go
not
first.
2, 3.
They control the media.
That's right. That's what we're doing now.
You never know. I mean, let's be clear.
And by the way, just in case the audience isn't aware, I'm not any of those 3.
I know, that's what I said. I just got
not that there's anything wrong
and
with
ironically,
that.
You were bar mitzvah. Oh my God.
There used to be a little skit on the Friday show. It was called Jew or Not a Jew. So we can have all the listeners will watch.
All right, so you guys go first
Well,
and tell me what you think.
SNL also had a Jew or Dead Canadian.
Oh, nice mix. But it's, the way that Whoopi defines race, is, maybe it's more of an educational moment because, there's an issue. How do we define race? One is, black and white is visual, you can see. With religion and the genocidal, extermination of Jews, I think that the reaction was a little bit too much. I think it should have been kind of an educational moment. How are you defining race? What is your understanding of the Holocaust and from whence it came? I think this, having her sit for 2 weeks may not be the most appropriate punishment because I think her understanding, she just misunderstands historically what has happened.
Well,
I agree. I think the 2 weeks I think it's silly to have her. What does it accomplish? I'm not that offended. I mean, I thought her remarks were kind of ignorant. I mean, the Jews, a race of people, were trying to exterminate a race of people.
Right, a categorized.
She was trying to say, well, it's really about humanity, inhumanity, one group just being mean to other people. When it's like, say, if you were to take slavery and say, well, it's not really about race. It's about, these slave owners treating other people badly. Well, it's not just other people. I thought it was an ignorant thing, but I wasn't that offended, and particularly to the point where she needed to sit out for 2 weeks.
I felt the same. I wasn't over, you just have to understand what you're talking about. And
I don't think it's a bad idea for them to call it out. We can debate the 2 weeks or not. I've been in conversations where the question of are Jews a race has come up, and what does it mean? It has been so we've been self-defined as a race. We tend to self-define ourselves as a race. What's interesting, I opened up, first thing I do in the morning is I pull out my iPhone and I start looking at breaking news. And there was a Time magazine piece, which was coincidental in its timing, because it didn't refer to Whoopi at all, but it was an author, well-known Jewish author, who had an excerpt of a book where he talked about a young man who had become a skinhead, had become involved in Klan activity. He was the driver in a shooting attack on a synagogue 30 years ago, and has turned around completely and has become very, very much. He's apologized and he's tried to take actions to make good. And one of the things that it pointed out, and I think my fellow landsman here might talk about this, but one of the things that is held very highly within Jewish tradition is the concept and act of atonement, which comes from learning and understanding and reaching out to do the right thing. And that, I think, is one of the most valuable things we as Jews have in our heritage. And I hope that that's something that Whoopi has done. She's apologized. Now, does she fully understand and atone in the sense that she gets the difference and wants to make that clear?
Thank you, Rabbi Eisenstein. Can I have my take now? Because I think it's much simpler than that. I think you guys are reading way more into this than is actually here. I think that in American culture in the 21st century, we have simply been trained to think of race as a matter of what color is your skin. Okay. in the 19th century, when we were discussing, or the 20th even, and talking about, the Jewish problem, and then it was much more, it was the language, you use the word race. You just said, and I've heard race applied to all kinds of just, white people who are slightly different from another group of white people. The French, ooh, what a weird race they are. It's like they're not, they're just French people. So I think that's all it is. I mean, when she heard somebody refer to, when she heard the word race applied to religion, she just said that's not race. I mean, if I can go see a rabbi for a few months and learn some Hebrew and convert to Judaism, have I changed my race? I mean, I think probably Portia would say, no, you're still Karen. So, I mean, so I just think this is, I think that all of your comments are very thoughtful, atonement and everything. And I thought she made an extremely sincere and fulsome apology. I thought her apology, she explained herself. She acknowledged her error. Yeah. And I just, it's just ridiculous that it's gone this far.
I saw an article where they talked about the American construct of race. And I thought that summed it up, in that people the vast majority of people see just the color of our skin and classify us according to that. Right. Like there are people who, I thought immediately of when Tiger Woods talked about being Calablanasian, and I'll let you in on a secret. Black people were like, if somebody, if the police officer on a New York City street goes, get your hands up and get down on the ground, he better get down, because nobody has ever accepted he had a new race of Calablanasian. Like it's just the idea that like people identify the American construct of race is just by the color of our skin, and that's how people typically see it. Now, do I think Whoopi Goldberg has a lot more advantages to be more well versed on this than the average day-to-day person does? Yes, I do. But I think what Nancy said is right. Once she realized the error of her ways and the mistake she made, it seemed like she was making a concerted effort to apologize and, as you said, Paul, atone for the mistake that she made. And so I thought 2 weeks was a lot.
Yeah. Well, I thought that she'd really educated us on race when she and her former boyfriend Ted Danson showed up in blackface. That actually happened. So this idea about race and culture has another interesting inflection point this week with the announcement of the nominees for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Included in the list are such acts like our own MC5, Pat Benatar, and then, of course, some easily presumed rock acts like, let's see here, how about Dolly Parton? Mm-hmm. But then we also have our own Eminem, and we have Fela Kuti, and some acts which are within the genre of rap. What does it mean to be part of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame anymore? And do some of these acts then belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I think it's...
Yeah. Isn't there like a Grand Old Opera Hall of Fame? Isn't there already like a kind of a country western Hall of Fame?
There's a Grand Old Opry, and they have both kinds of music, Joel, country and western.
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is a delightful tourist attraction in Cleveland, Ohio, which I recommend everyone should go to. The idea that we squabble over whether somebody belongs in it or not, I think is just ridiculous. I mean, it's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's rock and roll. It's like Dave Barry said when it was first announced. All the other buildings around the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame should be calling it at all hours, telling it to turn itself down. I mean, that's all we really need to know about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So, I mean, it's just, I think it's... but
what about, look, I mean, it's about sequencing. I mean, you've got MC5, you got the New York Dolls, who are these iconic rock and roll bands. Sure. And then you've got Eminem and you've got DeVos, who, by the way, I love.
Yeah, I love
should they be inducted before some of these other bands?
Maybe we should change it to the Pop Music Hall of Fame, because that's what it all is. I mean, rock and roll kind of was the absolute breakout, generation changing pop music wave. But it had all of these weird little stepchildren, just as rock and roll was was the rhythm and blues and juke joint music and so forth. I mean, it had these little baby stepchildren called disco and hip hop. And
are they stepchildren or are the illegitimate children there, Nancy?
Oh, okay. Now
I have a little
Yeah,
sort of an analogy or of sorts. Anybody who's been to the Ann Arbor Folk Festival, which I love, is people say I don't like folk music. Well, it's blues, it's country, it's some rock, it's I mean, Glenn Campbell was there for his last act with his kids and stuff like that. I mean, it's a broader concept. So when Nancy says, I agree, it's a broader umbrella than, I mean, rock and roll is a little bit too tightly defined. I mean, it's not a far reach for Eminem, for blues, and it really, it's pop music. Really,
in the Pro Sports Hall of Fames, you have to stop playing before you can get inducted. Like there's usually like a 5-year waiting period. So your greatness can really be over time. How great are you really? And I don't see that in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You got ongoing, bands that are getting in. Just interesting how they do things.
Rock. I don't know how you define rock anymore. Nancy, you said maybe it should be the Pop Hall of Fame. There's a legitimate point to that because it's so hard to define. Beatles, were they rock and roll or were they pop?
Yes.
I found something last year, which was quite interesting. I was reminded today because I'm a jazz fan. And as I was driving in, there was a special on Gil Scott-Heron. I don't know if everybody's familiar with him. His most famous piece was Revolution Will Not Be Televised.
We almost lost Detroit as a good one, too, though.
He is the godfather of rap music, which does rap belong in the Hall of Fame? A lot of people would probably get into a big argument over that. But
well, as long as Kenny G doesn't make it, I'm okay. so now we're at that point of the show where, of course,
now it's time for Deadline Detroit's nominees for Schmuck of the Week.
Okay, I know we have a couple people who need to get going. So, Portia, why don't we begin with who's your Schmuck of the Week?
My Schmuck of the Week is not a person as much as it is a group, and it is the National Football League. And the revelation, and I don't know how much of a revelation it was, that the Rooney Rule is BS. And those of us who watched it for a while always knew that it was BS. But to see people like Belichick who messed up and sent a congratulatory message to the wrong coach, and to see the sort of lens at which Stephen Ross tried to make sure that the black coach of the Dolphins, who is a part of this lawsuit, tried to get him to tank the season so they could move up in the draft. I've been saying this for a couple of years now, probably since Colin Kaepernick, the NFL is trash. And I remain with that thought today, that the NFL is trash.
Correct.
All right. There we go. Paul.
I'd probably say Jenny Thomas. I've thought that for a long time. It's nice that she's starting to have those orange strings connected to her for her role in the insurrection and propping up her husband and so on. But she is clearly she's beyond Schmuck of the Week. She's just the evil soul of Washington with a lot of money and the ability to raise even more.
Wow.
Hey. Joel.
I'm going to go with Portia. I think Stephen Ross is terrible. I can't stand him. And, it's the arrogance of being a billionaire, I suppose. But just being so removed from reality and taking the position that, what Flores is saying is defamatory. Everybody knows that the NFL has been a bastion of racism for years. Getting a black quarterback was revolutionary, let alone a black coach. And it's an absurdity to deny it. It's an absurdity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Nancy.
Garrett Soldano, another one of the rogues gallery that is running for the Republican nomination for governor, who went on one of the crazier of the crazy far-right cable streams this week and said that a woman who is pregnant as a result of rape should be a hero and have that baby because it might be the next president of the United States. And then he backed it up with this totally stinky, fishy smelling story about some mentor of his who found out that his birth mother was raped by 5 guys in a subway station. That tells you what they were all about. And still had the baby anyway. And wasn't that a wonderful thing he did? So he's just way to get that suburban woman vote, guys. You know, you are really on a path to success with that. So
that's going to further inhibit our ability to get public transport here in the Metro Detroit area. Okay, Allan.
I'm going to say the Supreme Court, which is always being accused of being, biased and, political and all that kind of stuff. Well, Neil Gorsuch tonight is going to be speaking to the Federal Society down in Buena Vista, Florida at the Disney's Yacht and Beach Club Resort. He'll be one of the speakers along with Mike Pence and Governor Ron DeSantis, which, there should be some lines drawn. I mean, just out of decency for themselves. And the other real quick is Bill Cosby. If anyone gets a chance to watch the Bill Cosby series on Showtime, and I think you can also see it on Hulu. It's called "We Need to Talk About Cosby." It's a pretty powerful. It's a 4-part series. Each part is an hour, and I watched it all very quickly. It's pretty compelling stuff. So.
All right. Well, my schmuck of the week is none other than Amazon founder and Svengali Jeff Bezos.
That guy.
That guy. He's because Freud is always still alive and kicking. He is having built for him a $450 million, 417-foot long yacht with 3 masts that's so tall that it cannot get out of the dock safely into the water channel. And so in Rotterdam, Netherlands, where it is being constructed, there's talk about having to dismantle the Koningshaven Bridge, which is an iconic and historically significant bridge, to allow the ship to go through and then to remantle the yacht or the bridge afterwards.
And don't come back.
All for one man's ego. We're having a piece of Dutch history have to be mangled in the process. So
do you
Jeff
think
Bezos.
Mackenzie Bezos wakes up every morning and looks in her bathroom mirror and says, "Thank you, Jesus, for taking that guy away
Thank
from
you."
me." Exactly.
Because
I'm the happiest woman in the world.
Right.
I'm so rich,
Exactly.
and I don't have to deal with this
She
shit
married a
anymore.
school teacher now.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Exactly.
that's. I think that's because Nancy. I think that Jeff Bezos got Jesus to be in her bathroom mirror. So,
A cameo.
Probably, yeah. That no, it's not a cameo. I mean, he's just there now.
So, this is
That's-
Jesus.
yeah,
You guys
that's-
we
are-
want
how
to
much
pray to
money
him.
is
We
there.
have to go to her bathroom mirror.
Maybe it weeps as well. Okay. Well, Portia Roberson, Paul Eisenstein, Joel Sklar, Nancy Derringer, thank you all for being on today, as well as thanks to Allan, who has the last word.
Drive home safely.
Take care, all.
Thanks, guys.